Thanks for joining the Colorado Shines QI implementation training webinar. You want to make sure it's actually recording so that people who are not able to join us today can see this later and refer back to it. So if you are an organizer or presenter, could you mute yourself for a second? Thank you. All right, here we go. So it says that we are recording. So I am Emily Wengrovius. I'm your primary presenter today. I'm joined by Karen and Bowden, Michelle Snively-Gonzalez, Rick Winter, and Sharon Pruitt-Kaiser. We are here to present this Colorado Shines QI implementation training. One of our big goals for this is that you will be able to easily update your Colorado Shines QI funding streams and begin to either create your application or at least know what kind of questions you have to ask your coordinator to proceed with that. So what most of you said, 58% of you said, is that you do not have additional funds in your QI funding stream to support QI-related activities. So what we're going to do first is we're going to go over where to find help materials, the timeline, and then we're going to configure funding streams in Sugar so that you can see how simple we've made it. Our goal has been made to simplify this process for you as much as possible. So if you have questions, please feel free to submit them to the question piece and we will read them anonymously. Please also make sure that your question applies to all listeners on the audience so that we can answer your council specific questions in one-off conversations with you after this webinar. So first, I want you all to see in the agenda is the program timeline at a glance. So Sharon had the brilliant idea of making this kind of like a reverse stoplight. So green is go, yellow is pause, and red is when we're done. So we hope after today you will feel comfortable to complete your funding stream then and also make some decisions around your agenda. And then we were hoping that once you've done that, programs will be able to apply for Colorado Shines QI funding through logging into their Salesforce application, clicking the QI incentives tab, and going and then applying like they did last year for all the other funding streams. After, the funding will not be available until October 1st because, as you'll recall, we're in this interim period, and that is when your contracts start with the Colorado Shines funding stream. Hold on just a second. Oh, sorry. I paused the screen because I was going to look something up, so hold on, let me play this. Okay. There we go. Now this will all make more sense. So after October 1st, you can begin to spend the funds that you pull down from the GAE and in your base funds. And then what we're doing is we're holding 60% of the GAE amount that was included in the RFA budget for councils so that they have time to recruit and get people in. So per council funding stream. So I can show you that in just a second to help you understand what that means. But basically, if you're going to want to look at the budget exhibit from the RFA and look at the amount that was used to estimate the GAE and take 60% of that for your council. We're going to hold that, like I said, so that folks can have time to recruit everybody. After January 1st, you will need to waitlist your applications and they will be approved by the Office of Early Childhood. We're putting in some spending deadlines for participants and for councils to help manage spend down and to make sure that funds and materials in particular are ordered in a timely fashion. So that's what these dates are here. And then we have the grant year-end date, which is very known to all of us. And the final reports, similar deadline as this year. So, so that is our program timeline at a glance. Great. The next part that I wanted to go over with you is, I know there's always a request, can we get the documents? You should have received the documents yesterday, and also, we have the support website. So this is what you see when you log in. You'll notice it's the first action here. Additionally, if you search CSQI, because that is how it is in Sugar, you will find all articles related to this funding stream. So that's a great way to access the information as well. But if you click here, you can see the training. Once we get the recording over to the Sugar team, they'll post it here. And then you can look at some questions and some articles here. So the next thing that we're going to do is what you've all been waiting for. We are going to go into Sugar and configure Sherman Early Childhood Council's funding stream. So there's a question about posting the timeline. You all should have access to this agenda, and it is on the second page. And the agenda is posted. If it's not, it will be posted on here. So the other thing I wanted to highlight is this document is also posted on the Sugar, on the support page. And I actually had Monica tell me that when she had it up on 2 screens and worked through this document looking at Sugar, she was able to follow it really well. So this is a good resource to refer back to when you are configuring your funding stream, in addition to this amazing webinar. Another resource that we've posted is some frequently asked questions that we received. These were questions that were submitted during the RFA process, and we think that they will help you in understanding some of the business rules and distilling some of that down. So you all are familiar with the awarded funding amounts, and this is what will be used to determine award levels in Sugar. So you could see I'm in Sugar, and I need to go into my funding stream record. So here you go. You're going to be overwhelmed for a second because I get to see all of your funding streams. So hold on just a moment while I search for our funding stream. And here's Sherman Early Childhood Council. I also want you all to know that I did dream about this webinar last night, and it was a positive dream. So I have a lot of confidence that what we're training to and what we're doing will hopefully make a lot of sense to you all. So the first thing that you're going to want to do when you're at your funding stream is go to your budget summary. And you're going to want to look at your total of budget. So what I'm going to go through first is for councils that do not have any additional funds in their Colorado Shines base funding, what they need to do to set up their funding stream. After I complete that process, I am going to go through and show you what councils who do have additional funds need to do to set up their funding stream. So if you do not have additional funds in your Colorado Shines QI base budget, the only thing that you need to populate here is your indirect rate. This indirect rate is what will determine how much of the QI award is set aside to pay your indirect costs. So if you're not sure what your indirect rate is, I would check with your finance person. All councils, if you have an indirect rate in your base budget, you must put that rate in here for QI. You cannot have indirect charged on the base budget, but not charge it in QI. So you are done. I'm going to use 10% because most of you, that is your indirect rate.
Hey, Emily, this is Rick.
Yeah.
My mind was wandering, and so would you mind just doing a quick review where you're at?
Yeah, sure. So we are on the budget summary page.
Cool, thanks.
So the reason we're at 0 here is because you do not have any budget. All of your budget to support QI activities is coming out of the Colorado Shines GAE. Okay? So again, if you do not have any funds set aside in your Colorado Shines based funding, this is the only field you need to fill out. I've saved this, so I am done with this part. You do not need to put anything in your QI dollars detail because you have, at this time, no QI dollars because the GAE has not been accessed. The next thing you need to do is put in your coaching rate. All of your Colorado Shines coordinators went through with you to calculate your coaching rate. So if you have an indirect coaching, if you have internal coaches, you will need to fill in the rate here that you calculated using your coaching rate calculator. This is the amount that will be used to inform the requisition when you create coaching requisitions. I have a question. What is the GAE? The GAE is when a program applies for Colorado Shines funding, it pulls it out of that funding stream and puts it into Sugar so that requisitions can be created. If you have external coaches, you will need to populate your external coaching rate. The amount I'm using is $100 because it's a nice whole number and it makes it easier for me to calculate. But you would want to put in what you worked through, what you've negotiated with your contracted coaches on their overall rate. So we're going to save this. And we, my friends, are done with setting up our funding stream. What does GAE stand for? It is an accounting term and it stands for General Accounting Encumbrance. I recommend that the questioner of this one refer back to the contract documents and contact their Colorado Shines coordinator if they have questions about how the GAE works. So if you also refer to the business rules here, it talks about how the GAE is, what allowable supports are and the business rules around it. So here's the information specific to the GAE. All quality improvement incentive funding is accessible through a general accounting encumbrance, a payment structure whereby each participating early childhood council contract will include full amount of the GAE as not to exceed statement and can draw down GAE with proper approval. So it's a nice way for us to have flexibility to support QI-related activities across the state. So for you councils, for the 58% of you that do not have any additional funds, you have set up your funding stream. What I'm going to do here now is set up the funding stream as if I have money in my base budget to support QI. So the big difference here is because you have money in your base budget, you are going to have an approved budget amount in this field. This is the amount that you will use to provide the additional QI and coaching activities. So for simplicity, I'm going to do $10,000 because you know me, I like whole numbers and I am on a live webinar. So the indirect budget is based on the rate that you populate. So for this purpose, our indirect budget is going to be 10% of $10,000, which is $1,000. You'll notice here that my total approved budget, right, is $10,000 because I have populated this field here, and we do not have any money from the GAE. So you don't have to worry about this field because these are only expenses that you are tracking in sugar, okay? If you are one of those councils that would like to put their entire budget in, please work with your QRS coordinator to do so. For simplicity, the simplest way to do it is to only put the expenses that you are tracking in sugar into the sugar document. So now we have $10,000 to distribute between QI and coaching. So we're going to go up to our QI dollars detail. And I'm going to go ahead and put $2,000 in for our extra QI because that's what I put in my Colorado Shines base budget. So you'll notice it goes to the pooled. What this does is once it's in the pool, you can transfer it to existing requisitions, QI requisitions to use as needed. You're done. That's all you need to do on this page. With internal coaching detail, if you're using some of this for internal coaching, what I request that you do is work directly with your QRS coordinator to fill out the amount because it impacts your coaching rate. So, and it's a little bit of a more complicated process, and for the sake of being as clear as possible and as concise as possible and not as confusing, we're going to go ahead and leave this one blank and assume that the $8,000 remaining dollars are part of my external coaching budget. So because my rate is $100 an hour, I have 80 coaching hours that I can give to providers in addition to what they earn through the GAE. And what's the sound? So I had a question, how did I get 2,000 from 10,000? Because that is literally what I put in my Sherman Early Childhood Council budget that is in my contract from my base funds. Similarly, I would have $8,000 worth of external coaching in the contracted or contractors area, and that is where this came from. So if it is not in your base budget, this does not apply to you. So you'll also notice that, let's see, I'm looking here. All of the $8,000 that you put in here is in your pool, again, because after a Colorado Shines external coaching requisition is approved, and then the MOU is from each, I'm sorry, once it's approved, you can transfer money from the pool into that requisition. All right. So we're done. We've set up our funding streams. What's similar to Race to the Top is that any funds that you get from the GAE will be tracked in the special allocation fields on the screens. So here is the indirect from the special allocation. This would be the total amount you've received from the GAE. Similarly here with QI dollars details, as programs earn those QI allocations and you create requisitions, the allocation here will go up. Okay? The other piece that's important here is I'm hoping I'm going to actually ask Sharon to speak to this really quick if they need to do anything down here regarding the internal coaching budget setting.
No, that budget setting is not in use for this funding stream, so you can just leave that alone.
So we're going to do our best to hide things that you guys don't need, or just work in this main area here.
Hey, Emily.
All right.
This is there's I think a pretty important question on the queue that says, I thought we were told that we were not to include QI coaching in our QI and coaching in our base budgets.
So the majority of councils did not, but it is, let's see if it has, if you look at the frequently asked questions, which were posted during the RFA process, you can see here that this FAQ directly answers that question.
Thanks.
So if it is a activity that we track in Sugar and you have appropriated funds for that type of activity in your base budget, it needs to be in Sugar. This FAQ, I think for you all, is going to be very, very helpful. We had, I think, over 80 questions asked during the RFA, so we've tried to pull out the big highlights. But if you have any questions, you can always refer back to those documents as well. All right, so now that we've set up our funding stream, we have a couple options for setting up applications.
Hey, Emily, before we move on, could you pop back to the budget summary tab just for one moment?
Yes, and I hit the wrong button, y'all, so just give me a second.
And if you scroll down, you can see in your recent on funding streams, you can pop right to your recent funding stream.
Look at this. Sharon just changed my whole life, y'all. Okay, so we're at our budget summary.
So if you scroll down, there's this really great field called total budget variance. Scroll up just a little bit to the total approved budget. So there's a total budget variance of -$1,000. And the reason why is because we have only $10,000 in our approved budget and $1,000 already indirect. And so we've actually over budgeted our coaching or our QI dollars by $1,000. So I just wanted to point that out as a quick control.
Correct. So that I'm going to go ahead and correct that now by making this 7.
Perfect.
Thank you, Sharon. I forget that on these coaching and QI screens, there's not the indirect piece, and that we have to remember to take that out. So.
And now it's a $0 variance, so that's great.
Look, we are in compliance, and we are not going to overspend. Okay. The next thing that we're going to go to is not these applications, but the application setup. So we have 2 options for I'm going to pause this for a second, the screen, so you guys remind me if I unpause it, because I'm going to do stuff while I'm talking that I don't want to distract you all with. So we have 2 options for you to set up your funding stream. And one of the things that we want to do is give you the simplest and the default option first. And the simplest option is similar to what you know, and that is, I'm going to unpause my screen now. You have I'm going to start up here, sorry y'all. Up here is showing you when the QI application will be released, and it shows a description on EC Connect. This is what your providers would see when they apply. So this is a generic description here that we put that applies across state. If there's more information that you would like to include, you can include that here. in your council region. So think about that. If that's something that's important to you, that you customize it to the providers in your catchment area, then please do customize this area. This requirements also is what makes someone eligible for this funding stream, and this also posts on EC Connect. So once you come to the Colorado Shines QI configuration screen, you have a couple options here. Like I said, I'm going to show you the default option first. This is the simplest option, and I believe that the majority of you will pick this option. So what you're seeing here is that when a provider applies for quality incentives, they only see text. And this is the generic text we have created, and this is what they would see. Again, this is a customizable field for you. So if you would like to add specific information, edit this text to make it so that it's more meaningful or more pertinent or more specific to your provider or regional area, please do so. Just remember, it needs to apply to all of the providers that would be applying through EC Connect. Okay. So the other thing that I wanted to point out here is this minimum award amount. You'll recall that we have the minimum amount for a family child care home. The maximum amount actually, the minimum QI award is for the family child care home, and it's $1,000, and that's populated here. For this process, you don't need to worry about that. It doesn't inform much on this end for you. What it will inform is after the MOU, after the application comes out, this minus the indirect amount, the rate, is what you would have to support providers. So let's look here. The next option you have here is you either have an indirect or you don't have an indirect. We're going to delete this middle one here, so pretend that you don't see it. And since I'm not sure if all councils have indirect rates, but I'm going to assume most of you do. This is where you will say that the indirect cost rate should be deducted from the funds awarded from the parent funding stream. So this is a big change, everybody. Previously, we added the indirect in addition to the QI awards. In the RFA and in the business rules, it is specific that the QI award amount includes indirect costs. So what that means is that whatever that rate is will be deducted from this, whatever is awarded. So you either, like I said, if you put an indirect rate on that budget summary, then that first option is the option you would pick. So we're going to go ahead and save this. And you're done. Now, if your council has a policy that we want to make sure that our programs receive X number of coaching hours, you can still do that. It is a manual transfer process. After a program applies, you will need to transfer funds to the coaching requisition from the QI dollars. And I don't know if Rick or Sharon or Michelle or Karen has a better way to say that or a different way to say that, but you can still do that. This is just not the nice thing or the positive thing, if you think that is positive, is that when a provider applies using this option, they don't see any dollars. They don't see how much money there is or anything like that. So all of that you would just need to do manually on the back end. And I had a great question of why, after we select this box on this and save it, does the maximum dollars not change here? And I think we might need to work with our developers on that piece.
But I think the reason that's still the max QI dollars that are available, and depending on what your indirect cost rate, that will decrease in the actual EC Connect portal. If it's preferred, we can go ahead and take out the indirect cost in this max QI dollars screen if it makes it a little bit more clear.
So we had a question of, does it come from the site's award or the council's award? The indirect costs come from the site's award. So if this family child care home gets $1,000, the indirect of 10% of $100 would come from this $1,000, and you would actually have $900 to spend directly on coaching, PD, or materials. Does that help answer that question? Okay, we're good. All right, so this next option that you have for your application, if you choose this option, this is where you want to show your providers how much QI incentives there are. If you choose this option as well, you can designate upfront minimum coaching hours. So let me show you and walk you through this, because I think that there are some important pieces of this to keep in mind. So we're going to go ahead and pick that we want to show the quality incentives preview and choices. Okay, so what we are saying is that we want the providers in Sherman Early Childhood Council's area to be able to see, if we have a family child care home, that they have a $1,000 QI award, 100 of it is an indirect cost, right? And then if we have designated how that $900 remaining with coaching is to be spent, how much coaching they have. So I have a question about indirect taken out of the GAE. Does it go back to the council? This is literally exactly how you've been invoicing us the entire time. So nothing has changed in the invoicing process around indirect rates. I have a question on, do we have to do indirect on the GAE funds, or can we do indirect on the base? You must do indirect on GAE funding. If you have indirect funds on your base funding, you must take it out of the GAE and out of these applications. Because on your invoice for us, you will invoice us the direct costs for that month, and then there will be a line for indirect, and that is where you would do your indirect costs. It's literally the same process that we did last year with Raise the Top from an invoicing perspective. So if you have $900 of direct costs, you can invoice us $90 of indirect costs. So, all right. So this is, again, you are the most transparent council that ever was, right? You want your providers to know how much of a quality award they have received, and then here's where you get to make some choices. So we're going to go ahead and show the quality incentives preview and choices. We're going to select the indirect cost rate should be deducted from the funds. Then this is the piece that you can make a choice about here. If you allow, this is asking, do you want providers to be able to purchase coaching hours from their QI awards? So I'm going to go ahead and say, sure. I would like them to say, yeah, I want to be able to purchase some coaching because I know I have a classroom that needs a little extra TLC. This here is where you could set, and you should and could set the default coaching requisition type, right? Because you are allowing folks to elect coaching hours, you can say we have primarily external coaches, or we only have external coaches in here. So I'm going to go ahead and default to external, and that will be an external coaching requisition. I've heard that this has been a request by councils to be able to set that default, so this is that ability. I want to emphasize too that if you do not want to give providers the opportunity to purchase coaching hours, you do not have to. This is a choice. So you'll notice here that you can set the minimum coaching hours for level 2 and the minimum coaching hours for level 3. But first, I'm going to save this. So what I wanted to highlight to you here is a couple things. Because I have had the indirect cost rate coming out of the award, the maximum QI dollars that can be assigned, or the maximum coaching hours that can be assigned, the maximum amount is $900 because we set our indirect cost rate at 10%, okay? So when you talk about minimum coaching hours, because the application is for family child care homes and centers, the maximum number of coaching hours that you can set as your minimum has to be $900 or less. Okay? Because if you have a family child care home, and let's say we set this minimum coaching hours as 10, there's not enough budget to cover those coaching hours. So the maximum we could do is whatever the maximum of the award is. Okay? So I'm going to say that my minimum coaching hours, the nice thing too is if you think generally that your level 2 sites are going to need more coaching than your level 3 to 5 sites, you can set a minimum for those level 2 awarded sites and a minimum for the level 3 to 5. I'm going to go ahead and set mine as 7 and 7. So I'm going to put it out there to everyone. If I set this as 7 and my external coaching rate is $100 an hour, how much does that leave for my QI materials or PD? That's right, $200 would be the remaining amount that they could use for QI materials and professional development. The key here is they can see this on the application. So they will see that they have 7 coaching hours at a cost of $700 that is part of their QI award. So one of the things that you need to think about if you pick this option in your application is if you want your minimum coaching hours for centers to be higher than the minimum, than the $900 that you could use for family child care homes, you need to be able to prepare for the conversation around how yes, this says that you have $700 worth of coaching, but we're actually requiring that if you have, 3 classrooms that you must have 12 hours of coaching. Okay? So think about how you want to have those conversations if this is all out there for your families, for your providers to see. So if you want everyone to see their minimum or if you do not want to do your minimum coaching hours, you don't have to. But what the provider will see is that they have $900 to spend in QI materials. So if you do not want to have those conversations with folks, the easiest option is to not preview incentives, preview, and choices. The easiest option is to just say, thanks for your application, we'll be in touch. Does that make sense to you? You'll notice too, when I changed the minimum hours, it shows you that the maximum QI has gone down to 200, like we said. So this narrative will talk about why these fields are the way they are. If you have included professional development as part of your school readiness plan, and you want to take some of the funds from the QI to support that professional development, please talk directly with your QRS coordinator about how to utilize this field. So now our application is set up, and I at Sherman Early Childhood Council want my amazing Colorado Shines coordinator to know that I am ready to go live. So I am having a moment. Okay, here, I am back. I am ready to say, hey, Michelle, okay, will you review this? Make sure that it makes sense. I want to go. I want my providers are ready to apply. If you say application ready for release, say yes, save it. And what happens at this point is Michelle gets an amazing email, so does the grant lead, that this funding stream has been set up. It summarizes what is not only in your application setup, but in your budget summary, your QI dollars detail, and any of the internal, external coaching dollars detail. And that triggers the, hey, this looks great to me. Do you have any questions? Or, hey, help me. I want to make sure that this is what you really intended. So I think at this point, unless I'm forgetting something to my colleagues, we've presented what were, oh yeah, the rubric. Sorry, one more piece here. Under the rubric setup here is if we're requiring the rubric, if you want to add other elements to it, then this is where you would add those criteria and that text. So I think if you have questions, if you've set up, some of you have experience adding elements of your own rubric in, of your own council requirements into here for scoring purposes. You do not have to. The rubric exists, and we will have as the baseline what the required rubric scoring pieces are. So the question is, how is the rubric required? The basic elements that our team put out is required. If you want to add to it, that is not required. That is totally a council policy decision. So the rubrics are helpful if you have more providers applying than you have funds. That's the purpose of the rubric. So, do we have any other questions for everybody from the audience? I know this is a ton of information. We've really tried again to simplify how many fields you have to fill out. So think about what makes sense for your council, what makes sense for your providers, what makes sense for your coaches and QI navigators. And if you're going to be transparent and show providers their preview and choices, make sure that you have a communication that everybody that needs to be communicating about that knows what they need to say. Especially if the preview shows something that is a little different than what your council policy might be. So there was a question about how come the amount is the same for center and home. The reason that we have this minimum award amount in here, this doesn't have to do with whether this is a center or a home. This has to do with calculating these fields here. So this can't be customized on an application based on what type of provider applies. So we had an example question. So we have a provider with 3 classrooms, so they get $1,500, right? So the question is this: if a center, I'm going to post it in the chat so you guys can see it, because I don't follow things verbally as well. So here we go. And I'm going to walk you through it, and I'm going to read it out loud too for our friends that may not be able to see the chat. The question is this: if a center has 3 classrooms and receives $1,500, and then with the readiness assessment and 12 hours of minimal coaching then there's only $50 left for QI materials. So let's do the math. We have $1,500 here. I'm going to pull up, you guys, I'm going to pull up a Word document so we can just walk through this. So we have the QI award of $1,500, right? Now, we have the indirect amount, so we have negative $150 for indirect, right? We're going to assume the coaching rate is $100 an hour because Emily likes whole numbers, especially first thing in the morning. All right. And it's the council policy that centers must have 12 hours of coaching. Okay? So we have $1,500 in QI. We have $150 in indirect. We have $1,200, sorry y'all, in coaching. So I don't know how to do fancy things, but if I add so what we'd be left with is $150 for QI. Does this make sense to you guys? I'll make this even. The thing that might be a bonus for you about this option here with the showing the preview and choices is it does automatically create if you choose minimum coaching hours, it does automatically create requisitions for you in coaching and in QI. This first, if you show not to preview the incentives message text, then it creates a QI requisition and you will need to manually create coaching you will need to transfer funds to create coaching requisitions. So I had a question of, did you say it was the OEC's policy to have minimum coaching hours per rubric or council's rule? We do not have a requirement around minimum coaching hours. Best practice is coaching, but there is no requirement from the OEC that you must use X amount per or X percentage per Colorado Shine's quality incentive for coaching. And then the other question is, the GAE covers coaching and materials, correct? It also covers professional development. So if you want to send coaches to the Rocky Mountain or staff or providers to the Rocky Mountain Early Childhood Conference and you want to use Colorado Shine's QI funding for that, you can do that. So I think remembering that the GAE does cover professional development of providers is really important. So think about that too. If you know that you want to send folks to Rocky Mountain, think about how you would want to budget out that QI piece and that and the coaching piece. Do you all have other questions for us?
I have a question if nobody else is going to ask one. Oh, it looks like Jessica.
So the question is, if coaching is included in the base budget, can we still request additional coaching hours if a provider needs it? So if you've included coaching in your base budget, you will have put that amount here in your approved budget summary, and you will have put the amount here in, if it's external coaching, in how much you have from that base budget, and then you would transfer from the pool to that coaching requisition that was created because of the Colorado Shines quality incentive application. Or you would create a requisition using the pool if you haven't done that yet and you do not want to use Colorado Shines QI. But this question sounds like you do. So I would assume you will have made a requisition that would total out the quality incentive amount for coaching and then QI. And then you could then add to that if you have money here because you have it in your base budget. So I can tell you that if you fill out your budget here and say that you have dollars in your base budget to support coaching and QI, you and your coordinator will be having a really great, clear conversation around making sure everyone understands where these fields come from and how they arrived there, and that we're all on the same page. Okay? The other thing is at some point we're going to lock down the budget editing privileges for being able to add dollars to the budget, so that if you have found that you're not spending your base Colorado Shines funding at the rate or the way you thought you would, you need to have a conversation with your coordinator to add more dollars into sugar to provide additional QI, professional development, or coaching. Okay, Rick, what's your question? And if you all have others, please submit it.
Okay, my question actually has to do with if anybody has questions after this. Let's say they start to do something and they can't quite do it because they didn't, they think they understand it now, but they might not when they're actually going through it. So one part of the first question is, can we include the questions that were here on that frequently asked questions document so it's easier for them to find it?
We can include the questions out. I think we'll probably just make it its own separate, like, questions from the webinar.
Okay.
Because the FAQ specifically came from the RFA Q&A piece.
Great. Because there are also people that couldn't attend because they had other meetings, so that would help them. Second question is, well, I'm assuming that after this webinar that all the QRS coordinators are going to be talking to their individual councils, so there'll be another chance for them to ask questions at that time, or is that about it?
Absolutely. Okay. So I think for councils, so what you described is the story of my life with mathematics. I think I understand in the classroom, and then I go home and try to do my homework. And sometimes it doesn't go the way I think it should. So your QRS coordinator team is here to support you. The request that we have is that you please look at this document, because it walks through every single thing that I did on this training. With the exception of the training access path, this is if you specifically called out professional development in your school readiness plan in your RFA, and you intend to set aside funds for professional development for staff, for provider staff, for providers. So this is very limited, I think, in who would use this. But everything here on how to set up a funding stream record, this starts on page 4. So the only thing that's a little different about this document is that I started with setting up the funding stream. The document starts with setting up application choices. Okay. The other thing that our team is working with the sugar team on is cleaning up some of the fields so that you really don't have a bunch of excess fields that you're seeing in your view, just to try to make it a little more simple. So our request to you is that you really genuinely try to do this first using the document, the webinar, the resources on the support page, and understanding that we are more than happy to help you. We're also trying to make sure that people begin to build their own confidence and comfort with how sugar, with budgeting and sugar, and where the fields come from, so that you have more confidence and more of an ability to easily reconcile what's going on in sugar with what's going on in your accounting system. Did that help, Rick?
Yeah, and I think, Karina, somebody else asked a question what happens if we make mistakes? And, so I'm also concerned, that there's a continuing set of process. So even after, they talk to they have their monthly meetings with you, there still is the web support site. And, if there's general questions that have to do with sort of how this all works, you might want to talk to, somebody at ECLA, for me, for example, too. So there's lots of support for everybody. We want to help you all.
Well, and to your point, Karina, we want you guys, it's okay to make mistakes, right? So when you submit it and it says, yeah, I'm done. Remember we talked about on this application setup, ready for release, that email would be sent to your QRIS coordinator. And, I would think that we would all just call and walk through and make sure that we all have the same understanding of what's happening. So, but if you don't have, I think where it can get complicated for folks is, one, if you do have funds in your base funding that you want to use, just making sure those are entered in correctly from the beginning, and that there's an understanding of how to reconcile that within your own shop with your accounting. And the other piece is, if you choose to have that that preview and choices, it's great. That's totally great, but really making sure that you understand what your providers are seeing when you choose that option. So, but we are absolutely here. We want this to really be a positive experience for everyone. I know, I remember when Race to the Top launched, or not Race to the Top, but when Colorado Shines launched, and there was a lot of confusion about how sugar worked, why sugar worked the way it did, where did these numbers come from? We know that there's been, it's been hard to be, especially in the back end of this database. It's really confusing, and that's why we really wanted to make it as simple as possible for everybody. And I do think the majority of councils, that don't have additional funds, doing your budget is really straightforward. You have to have an indirect rate in there, and you have to have a coaching rate. And so that's what you need. So the other question I had is, hey, where's the QI setup doc on the Colorado Shines help support place? Great question. So we can walk through it. So remember, we started at home, and then we're at the Colorado Shines QI implementation training. So we're going to go there. And I clicked the wrong thing, so we're going to go back because this is live on a webinar. Okay, here we go. We're going to pick this one. And then we're going to go and say, oh yeah, I want to configure my funding stream record. So we get a nice little support article. And then you have the attached step-by-step. So I hope it's 3 clicks or 5 if you click the wrong place first, but that's where you can see it. But like I said, we all really want this experience for everyone to be positive, and for when spending can begin in October, that people are coming at it from a space of confidence and understanding and how this system tracks your spending. Are there other questions? So the other piece is your application won't go live until you do this. So if, let's say, you know, next week is the week before Labor Day and you're like, I'm not gonna be able to do this till I get back from Labor Day weekend. That's fine. You can do it when you get back. Your application for your providers will not go live until this is set up and configured. So the absolute deadline is October 1st because that's when the funding stream starts. Ideally, we would like to work with you guys in the next couple of weeks so that we're not having a very stressful end to September with the funding wrapping up from this interim period and the moving into the Colorado Shines period. So I think my request is the sooner you can get it done, the better. However, we all know that, you know, life happens. So another option is we all have those monthly calls with you individually. So if that's when you want to talk about it, just make sure your coordinator knows so that we can make the agenda contain the information that it needs and make sure we have the time set aside. So I hope this was helpful to you. We're a few minutes over time, so I just want to throw it out there. Any last questions? Thanks for being patient with me as I click on wrong links and stuff like that. So I appreciate that. All right, I think we're done. So I'm going to stop recording and then I am going to stop the webinar. So thanks for being here. We appreciate your time. We appreciate all that you do and how much you've supported your providers and how much you continue to support your providers and your families and your communities. So thank you very much and enjoy your weekend if this is, especially if this is the last thing between you and being off for the weekend. So have a great time.